The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC polling group, here with Jennifer Smith, reporter for CommonWealth Beacon, and it is Thursday, January 22nd. This week on The Horse Race, we're starting our Delegation Conversations series, and we're starting it with Congressman Seth Moulton. All right, Jen, it is January 22nd. For those who are confused about what time it is or what day it is, we actually don't know what happened today, but we do know what happened yesterday, which was a lot of crazy stuff. Donald Trump spoke at Davos, and kind of the whole world went a little crazy.
Yeah, it is. I think one of the strange things on days when you're trying to prepare a political podcast and there's a speech that either happened right before you recorded or is happening while you are recording is you're sitting there going, can we parse the president's words exactly here? Is he saying we will not invade Greenland, or we probably will not invade Greenland? And that just makes the whole thing feel very strange. But fortunately, we don't have to interpret that all on our own.
Yeah, it was very confusing to me, too. I'm really not sure what he meant. And that's kind of not what you want when you're trying to figure out if the president is saying that he's going to invade a NATO ally or not, or might invade a NATO ally, or hopes he doesn't have to, but would be willing to, etc. But we do, Jen, we have a great guest to help us talk through this. So what do we got?
That's right. We are going to be talking about Venezuela. We are going to be talking about Greenland. We are going to touch on what ICE is doing in Minneapolis. We are going to talk about how old is too old to be a U.S. senator, a U.S. rep. That is, at least in Representative Moulton's view. There's so much going on. Let's just get into it. What do you think?
Let's go.
Welcome to the first of our Delegation Conversations series, and we're starting the year off with Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts' 6th District, so that's up on Boston's North Shore. He is a Marine Corps veteran who has represented the district for just over a decade now, and he is running for Senate. So this is a busy time in Massachusetts and the nation. Let's get into it. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, and North Shore plus Merrimack Valley, so let's not...
Absolutely. Good, for the record. So, as we speak, we are in the middle of what might lightly be called a chaotic foreign policy cycle, starting, I think, us off with Venezuela. 2 weeks ago, President Trump directed a military action seizing Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, bringing him and his wife to the States to face narcotics trafficking charges. Since then, the president has said that the U.S. will essentially run Venezuela. He is trying to rally oil companies into expanding or entering the country's oil infrastructure. At the time, you called the move insane. Where is your head at now?
It's in the same place. I mean, in what are we doing? The only reason why we're not talking about Venezuela and how much of a mess it is because Greenland is in the news, because he's moved on to his next conquest. But let's review the history really quickly here. He said we were going to Venezuela because of fentanyl. Then it turns out there's no fentanyl coming from Venezuela. Then it was the cocaine, but it turns out the cocaine's going to Europe. Then it was that we need regime change. But the same regime is in power in Venezuela. In fact, the vice president who's now running the place is in the same indictment that he used to justify snatching Maduro out. Then, by the way, it turns out that although this was a brilliant operation by the military, it could have gone a lot worse. 7 troops were wounded. Easily could have seen a helicopter shot down or something like that. So incredibly dangerous. And I don't think there's any Americans who say, yeah, getting Maduro was worth my kid's life, if that's what it came to. But then we're told, no, actually, this is not about regime change anyway. It's about the oil, but the oil executives in America don't even want the oil. So what is it? It's mainly a distraction. That's what's going on here.
And one thing that was curious is when we were going through, you filed legislation in November called the No Unauthorized Force in Venezuela Act. I guess, why? Was this something that you were specifically worried about? Is this what you thought might happen?
It's because I was specifically worried about it, even though the administration told us they were not going to conduct a ground operation in Venezuela. So when people say, hey, we weren't briefed by the administration, I mean, that's true that we weren't briefed on this operation as required by law. But actually, we were briefed. We were just lied to. For months on end, the administration was lying to Congress, even in classified settings on the Armed Services Committee. They just lied to us. And yet I kind of thought this is not a trustworthy administration. So let's just get everyone on the record saying whether Congress supports ground operations in Venezuela or not. Now, we're fighting to get a vote on this bill because it still matters today for anything the president might be contemplating going forward. But of course, before this operation happened, Speaker Johnson wouldn't even let us have a vote on the bill.
And so I guess that brings me to my last sort of Venezuela specific question here, which is, the question right now about what the president can do as opposed to what the sort of essential powers of Congress are in this situation meant I went back to the Congressional Research Service report from September, noting, of course, that Congress is supposed to regulate foreign commerce, impose tariffs, collect revenue, and the president is supposed to be negotiating with foreign governments. Congressman, has Congress pretty much ceded its foreign powers authorities here?
Completely. I think this will go down as the weakest Congress in American history with the weakest speaker that the country has ever seen in Mike Johnson. And so what Democrats have to do is not only stand up and use every bit of leverage that we have, like that's why I'm not going to vote to fund the Department of Homeland Security, because funding is one of the one levers that we still have left here. But it's also why we have to work quietly behind the scenes to get Republicans on board. So I am, at the same time as I'm pushing this Venezuela bill, I'm finding some Republicans who might be willing to vote for it so that we could actually get it over the line and make a change here.
And of course, this is going to come up again quickly as far as what powers Congress has in relation to in relation to foreign policy, and specifically in terms of military operations, because we're hearing a lot in the news these days about Greenland. And of course, it's escalated very rapidly and still seems to be escalating with tariffs, with saber rattling, with social media images of Greenland being part of the United States. So I guess to start with the basic question, what should the U.S.'s policy be toward Greenland?
It should be the same policy that we have, which is that Greenland is an ally. Denmark, which owns Greenland, even though Trump seems to think that Norway owns it because he's upset about Norway not giving him a peace prize and therefore he wants to invade Greenland. But leaving that aside, they are an ally. They're both allies. And we actually have a treaty that allows us to build anything that we want as far as basing goes in Greenland. So look, there is an argument that Greenland is of strategic importance. There are a lot of places of strategic importance around the globe, and we want them owned by us or our allies. One way to put this is, look, we can either just use the power that we already have to build whatever bases the president or the national security establishment thinks that we need in Greenland, or we can build those same bases while also paying for everyone's healthcare in Greenland and everything else, taking them under our wing. Here's an idea. How about we don't invade Venezuela, we don't invade Greenland, but we actually just pay for American families to afford healthcare? I mean, that's why I've introduced the Healthcare Reinvestment Act, which takes the excess money given to ICE in the One Big Beautiful Bill and puts it into subsidies for the Affordable Care Act instead, so that all these millions of Americans the Republicans are going to kick off of healthcare will actually be able to afford it for their families. Crazy idea, right? But that's what we should be doing.
And we certainly are going to get to that. But I have to say, these both seem to be long-term indicators of a deeper problem, which is, you noted it a little bit, but it seems in a way like Congress has almost voluntarily dissolved itself, giving up so much of its own power. It seems like we're living under constant threat of shutdowns, budgets rarely pass as they're intended, investigations are partisan, subpoenas happen haphazardly and seem voluntary. And the result is that the executive branch is empowered to do whatever it wants, including in matters of war. So how, in specific ways, can Congress regain its constitutional power and do the things that we all need it to do?
Well, this is what happens when Republicans are just total cowards and completely unwilling to stand up to their own administration. It's what happens when Republicans refuse to discipline a child, right? Which we have in this president. And so it's a very dangerous situation for the country. But I want to take your question and say, okay, what can Democrats do? Well, first of all, we can use every single bit of leverage that we have. And that's why we've got to hold them accountable when it comes to funding, because that's the one lever that we still have. A lot of these bills need a few Democratic votes to get over the line, and we should hold on to them tight. Second of all, we've got to wake up and realize that this party, our party, we've got to do better. And that's why I've been fighting for a new generation of leaders in the Democratic Party. With all due respect to Chuck Schumer, who served the country admirably for a long time, I do not think that he should be the head of our party in the United States Senate. And if I'm fortunate enough to get there, I will not vote to reelect him to that leadership position. We also have to win the midterms, right? And that's something that I've worked on very hard throughout my career. I've never been one just to get myself reelected. I've really tried to expand the Democratic map across the country. In 2018, the last time we were in this political position, with Trump in the White House and Republicans controlling the House and the Senate, my Serve America candidate accounted for about half the seats Democrats flipped in the entire country to take back the House. We need that kind of new leadership. Every one of those flips was a next generation leader. People like Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill, who won those two huge gubernatorial wins in Virginia and New Jersey in November of this past year. They're the kind of next generation leaders we need to take back these seats from Republicans.
And so to stick on that subject for just a second, though, we were doing a little bit of a scan through the Massachusetts delegation, of course, here. So you're running for Senate against incumbent Senator Ed Markey. You've talked about his age at length, and so I'm going to give you another chance to do that. You noted that we are in crisis, and you just don't believe that Senator Markey should be running for another 6-year term at 80 years old. There are 16 senators who are age 75 or older right now, but also inside our own delegation, of course, Elizabeth Warren is 76. If she ran again, it would be the same math as Markey. Richie Neal, your colleague in the House, is 76. So what is kind of the essential problem on the age front for you? Is it seat specific, or is it kind of the age category in general?
Well, look, I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Senator Markey and his service, and we've worked closely with his office and everything. Um, but consider this: he's the oldest U.S. senator running for re-election this year, and of all the 535 members of the House and Senate combined, there's only one out of 535 who's actually been in Washington longer than Senator Markey. And if everything were going great, then we should say, hey, let's keep doing it, right? But things are not going great for the country or for the Democratic Party. And that's why I think we need to change the Democratic establishment. We can't keep using the same old playbook when it's failed us time and again. We've got a second term of Trump, and he's hurting a lot of people all across America. I also think, though, to your broader question, that we should have a debate about whether we should have an upper age limit for people serving in Congress. We have that for judges in Massachusetts, for example, because we say, look, I'm sure there are brilliant, 79, 80-year-old judges, but we've set a limit below that because we just say, like, on average, it probably makes sense to have this limit in the same way that we have a lower age limit on members of Congress. Now, I'm very proud to have served with some extraordinary Americans in the Marine Corps, many of whom take on responsibilities over life and death questions that many other Americans would only dream of. And they do this when they're like 22, 23 years old, right? So I've seen young Americans take on more responsibility than many of my colleagues in Congress well before the age of 26. And yet we've decided as a country, you know what, like 26 is just a pretty good line. And so you have to be 26 or older to run for Congress. I think if the founding fathers were alive today and people were living so much longer, they probably would have set an upper age limit as well. So what I've said is, I don't know exactly what that number should be, but I want to foster the debate. And when we decide, I'll try to pass it into law. And if I am ever fortunate enough to be in that position myself, I will abide by it, regardless of whether it's made the law or not.
And to kind of crisply note as well, there is sort of the age factor, but then one of the things that's come up in past challenges at incumbents is, well, how do you distinguish yourself, essentially? Do you operate in a different zone of the party that you think isn't being represented? If it's not the age, what differentiates you from Senator Markey?
Well, look, we do agree on the issues. By and large, we agree on the issues, but I think there's a different approach to governing. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to, run on next generation leadership in Massachusetts and then go to Washington and just vote for Chuck Schumer, like Senator Markey will. I think we need new leadership, top and down in the party. Second of all, I think there's just a different approach to governing in that I really believe in getting things done. And I give a lot of credit to Senator Markey for being in the right position on the issues, and he's very good at press conferences and all of that. But we got to make a difference in people's lives. And a good example is 988, the National Mental Health Hotline, which I co-authored with a veteran across the aisle. And it was not an easy bill to get passed. It's had an extraordinary impact. It's saving thousands of lives every month. And we actually got it signed in Trump's first term. So even in a very polarized Washington, we could do something that's been so important for people all across Massachusetts and all across America. But it takes a lot of hard work behind the scenes, getting all the people together. It was not easy to get Republicans on board with this legislation, but we had to, and it's making a big difference. The other thing is, I do think that if you're fortunate enough to be a senator in a blue state, you should help the party win across the country. You shouldn't just be focused on getting yourself reelected. You should help Democrats all across America, as I've done with Serve America. And I would love to have an even bigger platform for doing that in the future so that we can secure Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate going forward and put a stop to this Trump MAGA horrific, I shouldn't say what I want to say, but horrific stuff that is going on.
So you've mentioned veterans a few times. You're a veteran, I'm a veteran, and I have to ask you in that context about what's happening in Minneapolis and with ICE specifically. And so drawing on your experience, what is the problem there? Is it leadership? Is it mission? Is it technique? Is it training? What needs to be fixed about the approach that ICE is taking?
All the above, without question. It starts with leadership and why they're even there in the first place, because they're clearly not there to just round up the most immigrants. It's been well documented that there are far fewer undocumented immigrants in Minnesota than in red states like Texas and Florida, for example. They're clearly sent there by the president and by the director of ICE to terrorize the people of Minnesota. They seem more focused on terrorizing American citizens in Minnesota to the point where they murdered a great patriot, Renee Good, than doing anything else. And they're actually showing up in full military gear. And I would point this out, Steve, I'm sure you agree with this, but for all the things that we did in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where we faced people trying to kill us every single day, like just directly trying to kill us, we never wore masks. We weren't cowards. We stood there proudly in the American uniform and served as professionals. And if a private in the Marine Corps, I'll just speak for the Marine Corps, all right? I'm not going to speak for other services, but look, if a private in the Marine Corps shot someone at point blank range as she was driving by out of the scene, like this officer did to Renee Good, he would be immediately court-martialed. I mean, that's just it's just wrong on every level. And I say this as someone who has served in those positions, managing people in vehicles at a checkpoint, for example. There is absolutely no excuse for what happened, and we should not be shy about calling it murder, because that's on the face of it what anyone looking at that video can see. And yet this president has not only weaponized ICE, he's weaponized the Justice Department so that rather than investigate the officer who conducted this illegal shooting, they're investigating all these other political figures just because they're Democrats. So at every level, this is wrong, and that's why we've got to stop it. The first plank in my immigration proposal is prosecute ICE, prosecute them for violating the law. And it's also why we absolutely, as Democrats, should not be voting to fund the agency.
So I have to ask just one question on funding, because there were two slightly different things that it seems like you've said about that. One was you noted earlier that you had introduced the bill to redirect ICE funding increases to healthcare premium support. You also seem to say that you would wanted to zero out ICE funding. You said, I have an idea for ICE funding, zero. That's what ICE needs. Can you clarify?
Yeah, well, look, these are different bills, right? So one is just a simple question to put before Congress that I think even Republicans would vote for, which is, do you want a lot more money going to an agency that's weaponizing the federal law enforcement against American citizens, including murdering them? Or do you want to actually support healthcare, which we know a lot of Republicans have voted for? So money doesn't grow on trees. Congress has to make decisions, and this is a decision funding ICE, funding healthcare for American families that I think a lot of people would vote for. But we're also having a vote probably later this week on simply just passing the appropriations bill, the baseline funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security, which includes ICE. And for a whole host of reasons, ICE at the top, but also for the basic argument I said earlier, which is that Democrats just have to use whatever funding levers we have. I will not vote to support funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
All right. Congressman, you have a very busy day, so we're going to let you go. So
I
thank you
do
so much for
actually have to
joining
go
us.
to votes, which is
Yes.
my number one responsibility, so I should run. But thank you so much for having me
Thank
on.
you.
It's been great, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right. Have a
All
good
right,
one.
take care.
Okay, well, the representative is off to vote, and we are here to get into our political calculus section, which is sort of where Steve and I get to debrief on the conversation we just had, talk about what we were hoping for, what we ended up hearing, and what we're thinking about going forward. So, with that very speedy intro out of the way, Steve, going into this conversation with Moulton, what was sort of at the top of your mind?
I mean, it's always the headlines, I suppose. Like, there's always the headlines, and you never quite know what they're going to be. You never know if it's going to be Greenland or Venezuela or something else entirely. So, it was very interesting to hear his perspectives on some of those things. Both just as somebody who's been focused on national security, former member of the military, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing that when we were kind of doing our initial preparation was also really interesting to me, which is that you and I often talk about sort of how being a veteran informs a stance on not just foreign policy, but also domestic policy, because over the past year, we've spent a lot of time looking at what it means when the US military is being kind of deployed in American cities. And ICE is a little bit different because it is sort of inherently an internal immigration force, but thinking about kind of the techniques that it's using, the public response to it. And of course, we've talked about the polling in the past. So I guess my sense is that even for Moulton, or maybe especially for Moulton, who is a veteran himself, kind of tackling what it means to serve responsibly or perform action responsibly while under kind of the cloth of the US military would be a really kind of important sticking point at this juncture of the midterms.
Yeah, and I have to admit I've had similar reactions to what the congressman described when watching ICE. Just like, I can't fathom the stuff that they're doing being permitted, allowed, done, etc., by uniformed members of the military, even in an overseas occupation. Like he said, you don't cover your face. You don't, if something happens where it's civilian is shot on video, you can be guaranteed there's going to be an investigation, court-martial, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's in a way interesting or weird to like even compare it to an occupation in a way, because it's just not how you do it. Like, this is just not how you do it. It's almost more like an invasion than an occupation.
It's been a little bit difficult sometimes, kind of as a reporter or someone who's watching kind of everything unfold, to sort of figure out, what are the roles that the different parties are trying to carve out for themselves here, because very often you have a sort of kind of patriotic military language that sort of crosses both parties a lot of the time, and then can sort of become more associated with whatever party is in power if you're engaged in some sort of overseas operation. But one of the things that was kind of coming to mind as we entered this conversation was, what is the role of not just a Democrat right now, but a Democrat representing Massachusetts, which is sort of one of the states with one of the major cities, Boston, that's kind of been directly targeted by the Trump administration for its kind of history, its political leanings, its ideology, that sort of thing. And so I was very curious about how Congressman Moulton sort of understands his positioning inside the Massachusetts delegation and then inside the Democratic delegation as a whole. So that was sort of how I was going into it. Were you also kind of curious about what it means to be a Democratic rep from Massachusetts these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was also expanding it a little bit. I was interested in just what it means to be a member of Congress, or what Congress sees as its own role these days. What does Congressman Moulton see as the role of Congress these days? Because it does seem in many ways like they've voluntarily ceded their power in ways that I would imagine the framers could never have fathomed, that a bunch of sort of power hungry people would just give up their power and, invest it all in one person who happens to be the chief executive. So, I was interested to kind of hear what he said about that. Then I did also take note of his comment on, if you're a rep from Massachusetts, you kind of have responsibilities elsewhere, because once the general election comes around, you're usually not in much trouble.
Yeah, there was a parallel there that was coming to mind with the last challenge to Senator Ed Markey, coming from Joe Kennedy III, where part of that discussion was also about what you can do in other states, actually. If I'm recalling correctly, some of that discussion was, you're not really terribly worried in the state of Massachusetts about seeing sort of, if this is your preference, about seeing sort of a Scott Brown situation again, but the idea of Massachusetts having a disproportionately high political profile, given that we're, this small little state over here, does often mean that our delegation members spend a lot of time outside of Massachusetts. During the presidential election, Ayanna Pressley was out there as a surrogate. They're all sort of out there as surrogates for the party as much as kind of representing Massachusetts specifically. So that balance is interesting to see come up in multiple kind of Markey adjacent Senate runs.
Yeah, and I think that then, just sticking with the Senate item for a minute, the other thing that was interesting to hear him ruminate on a bit was just the age question. Because it's no mystery really that he thinks, that he said that Ed Markey is too old to be a U.S. senator, shouldn't be running again. But he was also very respectful, I thought, both of Markey and of the other members of the delegation who are in that age bracket. But he did also say, once we figure out what that age limit is, like, he'd be interested in putting it into legislation. So definitely staked out his position as being in favor of, not just like a idea of an age limit, but an actual age limit. Like, you can't run for Congress after a certain age. It also occurred to me that this is not the first time that he's gone at this particular issue. It does often seem like he sees himself as the solution to the need for a generational transfer, right?
Yeah, we were going back through kind of older stories, looking back at kind of Moulton's history as a representative. And back in 2018, which feels like an absolute entire other universe, he was one of the spearheads of an effort inside the House to oust Nancy Pelosi from House Democratic leadership. And again, this same kind of talking point, this same line here of it's time for a new generation of leadership. And then it's a little bit funny to look at that and say, oh, 6 years later, most of them are in fact still in there. They have not gotten any younger since then. But that argument really did not land at the time. It was an unsuccessful effort. And so what you often see, and I guess I am curious if you run into the same problem during kind of the second Trump term, is that Democrats, and especially party Democrats, are generally pretty loath to go through kind of big internal food fights when you're sort of feeling like you are on the back foot. There is much more of an emphasis around kind of like rally around the wagon. And so I'm not sure if there was kind of an attempt to oust leadership right now, how that would actually go. So it's interesting to kind of see it more focused on sort of challenging the older incumbents as a starting place.
Yeah, and it seems in that sense like it's you mentioned it's a different universe, and it is in a lot of ways. Like, we've seen several prominent people die in office that have led to very significant impacts that have changed the course of history. Probably the most obvious one is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But go back a little bit further, and you actually have another instance of that happening right here in Massachusetts when Ted Kennedy passed away in office. That was the Democrats' 60th vote. and he was replaced by Scott Brown, and that changed the entire course of how Obamacare was constructed. Just because then they had to kind of deal more and change more and make more compromises and so forth. So I think that the argument has been growing, but has perhaps been turbocharged a bit just in the last few years. But as you note, like, it runs up against the instinct towards stability and the instinct towards we've got too much else to do. Now's not the moment. But I do wonder, maybe it's after the midterms, but sometime in the near future, it kind of has to happen.
I do love that you also kind of note the timing on it as midterm adjacent, because the attempt was literally right after the midterms last time. It was 2018 midterms. Trump had obviously been elected in 2016. So there are some real kind of parallels around everyone in a party, Republican or Democrat, kind of, coalesces around their leadership during the big presidential push. And then everyone fights in the midterms, because the midterms are usually the referendum on the sitting party, or the party in power. So the question that I kind of had, and it was interesting to hear him talk about it a little bit, is, the sense that there are still levers to pull from Congress, while at the same time, you kind of have to talk about it as though it is an entire body. When you're talking about Congress ceding its power, you sort of implicitly mean whoever is in charge of Congress. But the effect is that everyone sort of looks at Congress and goes, I guess we don't do foreign policy anymore. So I suspect that's a theme that's going to come up as people argue for seats in chambers or in bodies that we are seeing kind of, just shut down every bill that comes up to them. So it is a little bit, quixotic.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to having more members of the delegation on, but for now, we'll be right back.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to us by our MassINC Polling Group department here at the Horse Race Global Media Empire headquarters. And that is because we really don't have a super funny segment for you at the end, but we do have a really cool poll out that you should go see.
Yes, I saw the press release. I dove through the poll. I had a great time on this, because the quickest way to give me an aneurysm at whatever hour of the day it is to say AI and education right next to each other. Why was I anxious, Steve?
That's right. This was a poll of K-12 parents in Massachusetts asking them about AI and education. Basically, is it good? Is it bad? What's it good for? What are the risks? Do you think it should be used more or less? What limitations should there be for teachers and so forth? And definitely take a look on massincpolling.com. So the 1 or 2 sentence summary is basically that parents are divided about the use of AI in the classroom. They're nervous about many things. They think it could be good for some things, but are nervous about impacts on everything from learning to student privacy to equal access and so forth. So lots to take in. Definitely take a look. And if we have time next week, maybe we'll dig into it a bit more.
Yeah, no, I would love to do that, because the major theme for me that I'm always curious about with kind of new technology that seems to be proliferating very, very quickly is to what extent people talk about it as an inevitability. The idea that it's already here, that it's something we just have to deal with, versus something that, educators and parents can make choices about in some way going forward. So yes, I would love to dig into that more, but for now, a hearty plug, go read a poll.
That's right. Inevitable, like the fact that we're doing this podcast from the metaverse, which I think was also inevitable a few years ago.
Steve, stop. They don't even have legs in the metaverse. These little avatars just hop around. Exactly. The horses don't have legs either.
We joke, but that is all the time we have for today. I'm Steve Koczela, signing off with Jennifer Smith. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorse-race-podcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download, and reach out to us here at the MassINC Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.